Hi everyone, so I'm Linda Escobar, moderating here. I head up UX testing and product ops at Alpha. Alpha is a platform that enables management teams and product managers to make data-driven decisions about their products, users, and new markets. So let's welcome the panel and we'll allow them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with you, John.
All right, I'm John, founder, CTO of Customer.io, and we're a product messaging platform. We take, through a simple integration, we ingress an event stream from your product and give you all the tools to set up rules and logic to test and configure messaging based on what actions people take in your product or don't, and support multi-channel and all those types of cool stuff. That's it.
Cool. Hi, I'm Nikita Miller. I am a group product manager at Trello, which was acquired by Atlassian about 1.5 years ago now. Trello is a product that allows you to pretty much plan and organize just about everything across any kind of team as an individual, or as an individual. And I'm excited to be here today. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Giri Iyengar. Even though that says head of computer vision, I recently changed my role. I now head up ads engineering for eBay. We are about a small office here, about 150 people, a little over 100 engineers, probably about 20-25 product managers, and plus, rounding out, we have some sales people and so forth. So hopefully most of you have heard of eBay. Some of you may even use it. So happy to be here and looking forward to distributed teams and a great discussion.
Great. Hi, I'm Helen Wilson. I'm a director of product at First Dibs. We are based in New York, and we are a marketplace for rare and unique furniture and design primarily. We have sellers from all over the world, and I specifically focus on one of our buyer segments of B2B interior designers who are shopping on our platform.
So as we know, we're here to talk about distributed remote teams, which is a growing trend. And throughout the years, obviously technology has made it easier and has facilitated it and made it possible. So today we're going to be learning from our thought leaders about best practices and some of the learnings that they've had along the way, either in a distributed team or remote. So before we do that, let's take a little quick poll and from all of you guys here, who, in your companies, do you have distributed teams or remote teams? Raise your hands. That's a lot. Oh my goodness. Okay, so from all of you that raise your hands, which is the most people here, who thinks they do it well? Okay, a few. All right, so we're here to learn. Good. So let's kick it off with just learning a little bit more about how these companies are set up and how they go about in their approach. So why don't we start with Nikita, if you can talk to us about, when you joined Trello, how was the remote culture, and was it something that started from the beginning, or it's something that evolved over time?
Sure. So I joined Trello about 2.5 years ago, and we were remote then. We call ourselves remote first. We have an office here in New York, and about 30% are in the city. 70% of our team is remote, and that's all over the country and also all over the world. I think we do it fairly well, in part because it's part of the reason Trello was created. One of the reasons we even went remote was because one of our amazing engineers was thinking about going back home to Hawaii, and we weren't sure we could do that. And as a leadership team, they decided that, well, we'd prefer to figure out how to make that work than have Brett Kiefer leave and not come back, because he'd built a lot of the products even prior to Trello. So that's one of the reasons that we started. The principle there is basically it's an amazing way to not only retain but also get really great talent. So when we started Trello, we decided that we'd be okay being remote first, and so we decided to just put a lot of systems in place to make sure that works. So we have overlapping hours that we make sure people stick to. We try to make sure that everyone understands that when you're in the context of a meeting, for instance, everyone is on their laptop. There's no conference room with an image of someone on a screen staring at you. We tried things like, if we'd have sprints, you have stand-ups remotely, or whether it's, having a call or typing stand-up notes, things like that. I think a lot of what makes it work for Trello is because the principles that we try to live by in terms of our values are around just making sure that everyone feels that they belong and that they're a part of something, that everyone respects, this decision that we've made as a company. And so every time we think about doing something new, we try to make sure that we have a remote first way of going about it before we make any changes. So.
All right, let's go with Helen. I know this is your first time with your team doing remote, so if you could talk about how that's set up.
Yes, so remote, at First Dibs we've been doing remote teams for 3.5 years now, which is exactly the amount of time I've been at the company. So we started off with one pilot team, which was my team at the time, which was the growth team. And we had never had remote teams before. So we had one team of front-end engineers based in Lithuania. And it was sort of a test to see how can we integrate engineers from a different location into our very New York-focused office. So we started off that way, having one team with a full team remotely. And then we saw that it was a really effective way for us to work with remote teams. So we actually decided to scale it up across all of our product teams. And we now have a model where each product team has at least a couple of remote engineers in Lithuania and other engineers in New York. So it's very hybrid between the different teams. And we've also recently, in the past year, launched an India team, which follows the same model. So we've found that it's effective to have hybrid teams instead of having one team fully located in a different location. We found it really helps integrate the remote team into the office and also make sure that everyone in New York, especially cross-functionally from our QA teams to engineering management, that they know what those remote teams are working on. So we found it effective to model it that way.
Giri, what about you and your teams?
Yeah, interesting. So I was hearing Helen speak. We took a slightly different approach. Pretty much eBay is a global company, right? So we have offices everywhere. So strategically, we made a decision about a couple of years ago where pretty much every office tries to specialize on something. Right? So for example, we have our Portland office, which is where all the native development for eBay happens. So if you're a native developer, you had to be in Portland, or you had to work for some manager who works in Portland and so forth. Right? And New York, on the other hand, specializes more on advertising and machine learning, data science kind of focus. That's the specialty for New York. So, and we found that to be a little bit more effective practice where we have a center of excellence, which essentially means that birds of a feather kind of flock together. We have a group of people who can leverage from each other, get some skills, and sharpen our skill set and so forth. Having said that, we occasionally do have mechanisms where people, you might have a really good engineer who wants to work from Austin, or a really great native developer who wants to work from New York. We do allow for that, accommodate that. But we try to make sure that pretty much every sprint team is co-located. That's one of the values that we shoot for. Say that let's have a complete sprint team with a product owner, with an agile lead, and the entire team sitting together in one location to try to minimize communication overhead. We do have, essentially, we use Slack, we use Jira, we used to use Trello, and I'm going to ask Nikita a little bit more about that. Yeah, and we use we're on video chat all the time, pretty much. But we try to essentially, when we are at the team forming stages in our planning process, we try to make sure that the teams are mostly co-located in one area.
John.
So we started the company in 2012 in New York. Worked in New York for a couple years. I think in 2014, my co-founder wanted to settle down, create a family, get married, and felt like he couldn't do that in New York. Wanted a place with a yard, grill, and all that stuff. So we started exploring. In past companies, we'd worked in places where there's some remote, or it's you can work half the week somewhere else or at home. But we weren't really sure about full-time remote. So we tested it out and went kind of like the remote first type methodology, where everything how we operate in the company is with the assumption that everybody's remote, not co-located. And there's some learning pains and lessons learned. I think he moved to Portland, opened up a small office there. I took the advantage to travel around and do the nomadic lifestyle for a while. I think as we started hiring and growing the team, one of the earliest lessons that we learned was if one of your founders is a nomadic person, you attract a lot of these people who they only want the job so that they can try the nomadic lifestyle, and they're just interested in traveling and not doing any work. So we quickly learned that they need to be excited about the role for other reasons. But then if you find great people doing great work, one of our engineers, he and his wife and even his 2 cats, moved to Europe for a year or 2, moved to South Korea for a year, experiencing things they want to experience in their life, we love to support that. We had a project manager just start 6 months ago. Right after she started, she's like, all right, I'm building out a van. I'm going to go do #van life. And she is, going through national parks in the West Coast and somehow finds good enough internet or has enough cell signal or whatever to, do video chats, and it hasn't affected her role at all. And she's doing, what she loves to do. So
that's a powerful van.
Yeah.
Powerful van. So along those lines, if you can expand a little bit more on the challenges. You said you had a lot of challenges at the beginning. What were those challenges?
I think hiring, finding the right people, that still happens today. I think certain people, and it's really just how you want to work and how you want to interact with people. Working from home or working by yourself in a location where no one else is around can be difficult day to day. It's a lot of people, like that camaraderie of being in an office place and, on a whiteboard, all that great stuff. So that's always been a challenge when you just can't make it work with somebody, or they're not happy. And I think there's the trade-off between high collaboration and execution. And I don't think it would have gone as well if we were distributed from when we started the company, because it was mostly just me and my co-founder, late nights, just trying to imagine things. And that was really helpful to do next to each other. But I think as the company grew, now we're able to manage it, and the roles are clear, the tasks are more clear, and we a couple times a year get together in one place to hash out where we're going next as a full company. And then as we go back out to our various places, we're all aligned and we all know what we're trying to get done, and that's a little bit more easy to do as a distributed team.
Any challenges for you guys? I'm sure there's been plenty. Helen?
Yeah. So we are working, like I mentioned, with teams that are at pretty significant time differences to us. So our Lithuania team is 7 hours ahead, and our India team is 9.5 hours or 10.5 hours sometimes ahead. So that requires for us to really change the way we operated previously. It's really, timing of things becomes really important. So I think there was a big culture shift to help everyone cross-functionally understand that you have to make sure that all your ducks are in a row at the end of the day, so that when a remote team starts the next day where it's midnight here, they have all their questions answered. They have everything they need to do in order to have a productive day. And that's really important for the PM to make sure that that's happening, but also for everyone to understand the QA team needs to get bugs in by the end of the day, or the design team needs to get specs, and really just making sure that everyone's aware of that. And then I think another thing that we have learned a lot about is communication and making sure that's really transparent. There's a lot of stuff that happens ad hoc in an office, and it can be challenging to make sure that a team that isn't co-located inherits all of that information. So we have spent a lot of time creating Slack channels and different types of sort of daily digest for our remote teams to make sure that they get the latest decisions and they're in the loop on that.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to the tool conversation. Are there any specific tasks that remote folks are doing to kind of support the overall just strategy and approach of the company? How do you guys go about that? Are people 9 to 5? Nikita?
I have so many thoughts. One, can I answer both of those?
Yeah.
So and it's related. So to your last question, the way we try to do that, one of the great things about being remote is you just have a lot more flexibility in a lot of ways, because you can do things and they don't necessarily have to be synchronous the way it is when you're in an office. So for instance, I just came back from maternity leave, and my son goes to sleep at 7 and I'm out early in the morning, so I need to find a way to make sure that I get home so I at least see him for 90 minutes or 2 hours. And so it's great to be able to say, I'll be in the office from 8 to 4, head home, put Miles to sleep, put him to bed, and then from 7:30 for a couple hours, I can log back on and get work done in that sense. So that kind of flexibility, I think, is really amazing. Overall, though, we do try to make sure that there are at least 5 hours overlap across time zones. And those 5 hours are really important, because that's when you do all the things you just mentioned in terms of figuring out digest, aligning on things. If a different time zone is waking up and you're going to sleep, what do you need to do about that? So I think that's really important. To the former question, if I can take one more minute, because this is on my mind a lot these days, in terms of what the challenges are. I think one of the hardest things being a product manager is, you're constantly juggling so much information. I think when you're remote, you run the risk of constantly being interrupted. Like between email and Slack or Stride, Trello, Confluence, whatever the tools are that you're using, you're expected to kind of, give immediate feedback. And so figuring out when to actually get real deep thinking and concentration done while you're remote is something that I think we're all working through. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Giri?
Yeah, definitely. The focus time is extremely important, and that's one of the things that we realized very quickly. And so we ended up instituting a rule about 2 or 3 years back, saying that no meeting Thursdays, right? So, and most of us try to honor that, and every once in a while, as pressures build up, people start slipping. But primarily, it's meant for engineers. So engineers are empowered within the company to just blanketly refuse any meetings. Product managers and essentially engineering managers need to attend meetings on Thursdays as well. So what we end up saying is that, okay, major engineering decisions will not be taken on Thursdays, but we can meet for other things. And we can meet for essentially synchronizing and doing other things. But if we need any engineering input in terms of a decision needs to be made on our architecture or something like that, we will not do on Thursdays. So to give the engineers the complete focus time. And I have typically empowered my engineers to come back and say, they'll complain every once in a while to say, hey, I'm getting called by this PM for this stand-up, and I don't want to go. I'll say, tell them, no meeting Thursdays, just go ahead. And sometimes people will complain, HR managers will come back and say, this is the only day the candidate can interview, and then this engineer is refusing. How am I going to run this? Sorry, we have to respect that. Right? No meeting Thursdays. We made a rule, and we're going to stick to that. So we do those kinds of things for focus time.
I am currently advocating for the exact kind of focus time for product managers.
Yeah.
Second that. No, go ahead.
Sorry, just to finish that thought, right? So it's very important to have that focus, but at the same time, you need to have the balance, the flexibility, and so forth, especially when you're managing, working with remote teams, right? So we have a significant presence in Israel, and Israel, for eBay operates Sunday to Thursday, which essentially means that we have 2.5 days of overlap between US and Israel. So that makes all the problems a lot more challenging. So we have to make sure that communication is very clear. So we have an agreement where we come back and say, Mondays and Wednesdays, the Israel team will stay up late, right? Because that's the only days that, if you imagine it, typically it's 7 a.m. in San Jose, 10 a.m. in New York. It's already 4 p.m. in Israel, right? Things are already very challenging. So by the time you come in on Monday morning, they're already trying to get out of the door. So we institute a rule saying, okay, Mondays and Wednesdays, they'll stay back late. So all the things like all hands, now across the company, when we need to do any kinds of all hands or sprint reviews, we try to do them on Mondays or Wednesdays. So we have to do all those kinds of additional things to sort of make sure that remote teams are sort of kept in the loop and we stay synchronized as one company. It can get challenging quite easily.
So how do you foster culture within your teams? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think one thing we do that's sort of similar to what you were just saying is we have, for us, the time of overlap is really in the morning. And so on a day-to-day basis, we know that the morning hours are sort of sacred time for us to be able to work with our remote teams. And that's really where we have the bulk of our engineering-focused meetings are in the morning. And it actually has a dual benefit of freeing up afternoons to be pretty meeting free for most of the engineering team. Unfortunately, not as much on the product team, but so I think that that's one thing that's really been a shift for our team. Everyone knows that there's this time in the morning where they can interact with the remote teams. And then I think another thing sort of more broadly has been about making sure we have visits between different offices. So we make sure that everyone on a remote team comes to the New York office at least once when they're in their first year. And then conversely, that the PMs and engineering managers who work with the remote teams, which is effectively everyone, go out to their respective locations with some recurring cadence, just to make sure there is that face-to-face informal time that you miss out sometimes with remote teams.
I think culture is really hard, harder than obviously having an office. I think we kind of try to tackle it two ways. The first one is, overlap is hard, like getting people who should be working together, like a small group. We break our product team into squads, so cross-functional, one person in each role, and they're going to be working together every day and need to be close by. We had one failure where we didn't really plan for it, but we had someone in the squad in Australia, someone in the squad in Europe, and someone in the squad in Pacific, West Coast U.S., and had zero overlap across the three of them. They could never get on a call at the same time, and we've shifted that so that at least each small group is able to operate and have a good amount of overlap. And the other thing we do is just you can't really replace in-person time. You can't replicate it with enough video calls or anything. There's something about being in the same place as everybody else. And so we do 2 retreats a year where we take everybody and co-locate them for a week, do a lot of team building, do a lot of planning and organizing and thinking about what we're going to do the next 6 months. And that tends to help a lot.
How about you, Nikita?
At Trello,
all coming. You have a lot going.
We do a lot of similar practices, very similar, I think, to what Helen mentioned at First Dibs as well. For the product team in particular, I think at some point last year we did one of our PM surveys, and most of us are remote. And one of the big things that came up for the team was that they didn't feel like we were a team, like a squad, right? Because we each have our cross-functional teams and you spend a lot of time with those folks and that's easier remote. But when, you're 10 product managers and you maybe see each other, on video conference once a week, you don't get that same feeling of camaraderie, right? That I think you tend to get with a team of PMs when you're co-located. So we've been trying a lot of things. We have, every Friday we have a 2:00 where we just hop on a call and we just talk. Yesterday we had it and somehow we ended up, obviously the elections came up, we started talking about silly movies, what we're reading, so just something else to make it feel like there are other ways for us to connect with each other beyond our weekly product meetings. And so we're just spending a lot more time figuring out ways to do that. We do offsites as well, so we can kind of build that. Other ways that we're doing this with the product team in particular is folks share deep dives on what they're working on. So we'll have ad hoc meetings. If someone's struggling with something, we can say, okay, all the PMs, can we meet at this time, just to kind of work through it with this person. So being able to just do things like that aren't necessarily pre-planned, I think has been making a big difference just in making the PM team feel like more of a cohesive unit.
If we can take a closer look into just product management, and you brought that up in terms of stand-ups and things of that sort, how does that happen at your company? Helen, if you want to start, especially with your product team.
Sure. So we have stand-ups every morning, and it's a constellation of people from New York, Lithuania, and India. So it's a great time for us to all check in. And then we have our sprint plannings on every other week. So again, that's another critical moment for the team. And then beyond that, I think our main points of sort of interaction are more ad hoc around projects. And I think when, sort of like what Nikita was saying, we obviously have our scheduled meetings and kickoffs and stuff like that, but also having a lot more informal discussions with our remote teams and making sure that that's really easy to do. If there's a question, we just jump on a quick Zoom, and really creating that culture of quick connectivity and not having everything super scheduled.
Are there any tools you guys are using, and I know we kind of touched on that, to facilitate that, whether you're brainstorming something, putting together a product strategy, what are you using and what's been effective and maybe not effective?
Yeah, clearly, I think the Slack is one of the things that pretty much, I think, all the way, small companies to big companies, right? I think we all are sort of converged on Slack as a preferred way of communicating. So Slack with lots of dedicated channels for each sprint teams and, cross teams that collaborate with each other. We do a lot of Slack. We use Jira. We used to use Trello quite a bit in the New York office, and then eBay as a company shifted over to Jira enterprise-wide. So we shifted over somewhat reluctantly in the New York office to Jira. And so most of the project management happens through Jira and wikis and so forth. So every sprint team writes those kinds of tools. Plus, pretty much everybody, has their own, VMR. We use a lot of Polycom. We have conference rooms dedicated for us to essentially, walk in and connect with other people in remote offices. And yeah, so we pretty much like what Helen was mentioning. We substitute. We do use these tools, but these tools are never a substitute for the actual work that needs to get done in terms of. We have sprint plans. That everybody meets together as a team. We do the sprint planning. We have stand-ups. And then larger teams, we essentially do sprint reviews once a month. We check in on each other's, and come back and say, okay, what's happening? So every team gets to listen in on all the other teams' reports in terms of what they accomplished in that month. And then that way they can come back and say, okay, if there's a roadblock, is it going to emerge? How do I essentially prevent that from happening? How do I head that off? Or come back and say, okay, this is going to be an issue 2 months down the road. What can I do? All those kinds of things we start discovering those kinds of things in these review sessions, right? And then sometimes we also have a quarterly initiative reviews where we look at across broad initiatives within the company. Typically, as a company of eBay, we have 6 or 7 broad initiatives that we're working on. So we'll do this once in a while, initiative reviews that PMs and engineering leads will go and talk about what's happening, where they're having issues, and so forth, so that you can solve that at the initiative level.
Are there any unique frameworks or processes that you guys are using to just maintain productivity?
I'll talk about the tools a little bit. We struggle with that for a long time. And it started with Slack. As the team grew, there's like too much stuff. No one could keep up with anything in Slack. Something important you're trying to say, no one would see it because they're just like too many notifications. We just shifted tools and had the same problem. We switched to Basecamp, and then everybody's writing all this Basecamp content, and everyone's like, I can't keep up with Basecamp anymore. Then everybody wanted to try a new tool, and I'm like, the tool is not the problem. It's like the communication. And now I think we've found something that works a little bit better. It's not perfect, but trying to give every smaller team autonomy and kind of a direction, and they're setting out what they're actually building. And then communication inside that group is easier to handle because there's only 3 or 4 people on each team. And then as a company, you're really talking amongst teams, and that at least lowers the cross-channel and the amount of stuff going back and forth. But yeah.
We use Trello a lot. And, we also use Mural. Mural's been really great for facilitating brainstorming sessions remotely. Works a lot better when you're on desktop, just to move things around. So that's been really great. But similar to what you're saying, I think a lot of it has been figuring out for individual teams what works best, and so kind of setting some parameters around how cross-functional teams communicate has made a really big difference.
You want to add?
Yeah, I think that one thing that's been really helpful is making sure that in our different areas that there's ownership for specific projects. And so the more that we can have, sort of similar to what you were saying earlier, the more we can have one team in one location really be the owner of a specific initiative, that really helps in terms of making sure that they are controlling the flow of communication related to that, and then making sure that they have everything that supports them. So if it's a dedicated Slack channel or whatever it may be, where as they make progress, they can communicate so that the rest of the organization knows. And then I think on the tools front, one area that is critical to us is our video conferencing. And because we don't have a distributed team, we sort of run into the challenge you mentioned earlier of having a big group of people and then a couple of individuals dialing in. And that's something that we're still, trying to figure out how to handle. One thing that we're piloting in the next couple of weeks is having everyone in the room bring in a computer even if they're in the same room, but figuring out how you can really make it an equal conversation even when you have a lot of people in the same location.
When it comes to remote locations, what have you guys found that has worked in terms of either in the US or international? What are some of the advantages or disadvantages?
I really like working out of Europe because I'm a engineer, introvert. Sometimes I just want to do work, nobody around. And the best thing about working out of Europe is everybody in the U.S. is still asleep. Now we have people in other places, so they're still online, but most of the company is asleep. And so you get like a full half day where you're not bothered and you can just go heads down and then you have to kind of interact with people later in the evening, but that's not usually a problem for me.
Within Europe, though, which cities or countries have you found best?
I guess as a more nomadic person, just go around, try to stay in one place for a couple weeks at least, so that you settle down and you have a routine a little bit. But yeah, particular place, I guess maybe not a great question for me because I'm just anywhere, that's fine.
There you go. Nikita?
I think the most important consideration for us has just been time zones. So for instance, we work now with a lot of teams in Sydney since the acquisition, and figuring out what are reasonable times for all of us to work and managing that has been tricky. So I think we don't have yet co-located teams dispersed, but we do try to think about time zones and regions that make sense for different teams. So having, a core team in the Northeast and then a team in Asia probably doesn't work very well. So those are the sorts of things that we consider. In terms of hiring or things like that for a particular region, I don't think we've narrowed in on any. That's kind of the beauty, we think, of being remote. You can actually just be more open and hopefully get more diverse skill sets and people.
Helen?
Yeah, I think a critical thing for us in choosing our locations, actually both the locations we're in, we had engineers who had been at our New York office and had been there for several years, and then were from Lithuania and India respectively and wanted to move back and set up teams. And I think that's been critical in them being able to bring our company culture to their locations, and also they just have a certain level of expertise in how our platforms work that has made it really helpful in terms of them being able to build up a team. So that's a unique situation, but I think from a sort of more replicable point of view, making sure that if it is a remote office as opposed to a distributed employee, making sure that there's that upfront investment in that person understanding the company, understanding how the team works really, really well, and whether that's them coming to the home office for a month or whatever it may be. I think that's been really critical. And because of that, I think we've been able to actually reap a lot of the time zone advantages. We recently just finished a big project, and it was great because when we'd come in the morning, our India team would have sort of triaged all the issues, and we had a really clear map on how to get started for the day, and we're able to really leverage that into a benefit.
All right, so we're at time, but let's open it up at least for one or two questions. Anybody right here in the front?
Yeah, what tools do you use for running a retrospective that everyone who's remote involved?
I don't know the name of it, but we use a tool that's basically like a visual workspace with, you can put notes, and then we have a period of time at the beginning of the retrospective. Everybody can like put their own notes up, and then you go through them together. I don't recall the name of the tool, but there's some like organizational.
No, but
I can try to find it later.
Might be Mural.
Mural, yeah, it sounds
maybe.
similar to Mural.
Yeah.
There's another one right there.
Hi. So within a product development squad, it's really important for everyone to really understand the user. So with remote teams, how do you help them develop that empathy and get in the line sense of purpose?
I can.
We don't have remote product managers, so I think it's mostly our remote engineering teams, and I think we just make sure we're sharing all the user insights, but someone else might.
Yeah.
We have all remote product managers. So some of that is, do you mean specifically for the product managers, the team?
Or, so for example, I work with remote developers.
Right.
I probably work next to my designer. But with that, you have to have a lot more sessions than I would if I were co-located with my engineers.
Okay.
So around user research or building up the product kickoff. So what are the best practices that you've implemented to everyone along?
Sure. So one of the quickest ways, or most straightforward, for a lot of our user research engineers also join those sessions, which I think is really important. Sometimes lead them, in fact, so it's kind of shared between engineering, product, and design. So I think that just works well. In terms of kind of sharing or just evangelizing it, we use Trello for some of that. We use Confluence a lot, where each team is kind of responsible for doing obviously write-ups that you then broadcast to the entire PM team and also across squads, so that we're actually sharing the learnings as we go. Other things to do with that in terms of, we have deep dives that I mentioned, which is basically a PM or a triad, PM design, engineering will then present to the entire squad or pod, which is all the product managers, and then field questions. So a lot of that it's really, in some ways, high touch. But I think for something like user research, you're probably better off being high touch and making sure that the information is shared than expecting people to kind of filter through the dozens of pages they're probably looking through in a given day. Does that answer your question?
I would add, like, I think getting them involved, yeah. Any way that you can get them involved with the customer. We regularly have engineers or everybody in the company do tech support and answer customer questions, and I think that goes a long way in taking I'm writing code all day to the stuff I'm building, like, affects people's lives and causes them problems and frustration, and or makes them really happy, and just getting close to that any way you can, sharing conversations you have with customers or anything. I think at least in our experience helps everyone really try to understand the customer.
All right, so you've given us a lot of great frameworks and just processes to experiment with, so we'll take that away as a homework. So let's give them a round of applause and have a